Imagine you have a newborn. Everything is perfect. Then a few weeks in, you notice something. The baby isn't moving the way babies move. The arms aren't lifting. The legs aren't kicking. You bring them in, the doctors run the tests, and they sit you down. Your child has spinal muscular atrophy, a rare genetic disease that attacks the motor neurons, the cells that tell muscles to move. Without treatment, most children with the most severe form won't survive past 2 years old. And then the doctor tells you there's a drug, a single injection, 1 dose, and it works. Children who received it before symptoms started have walked, run, grown up. The price is $2.1 million. One shot, $2.1 million. And here's the question that nobody in the pharmaceutical industry wants to answer clearly. Why? Not just why is it expensive, but why is it that number? Who calculated it? How does a price like that even get decided? That's exactly what we're going to find out today. So, before you get comfortable, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And take a moment to like and subscribe. Now let's get into it. The drug is called Zolgensma. And to understand its price, we first have to understand what it actually does. Spinal muscular atrophy is caused by a single broken gene. One gene, out of the roughly 20,000 in the human body. That gene is supposed to produce a protein that keeps motor neurons alive. Without it, the neurons slowly die. The muscles they control stop working. First the legs, then the arms, then eventually the lungs. What Zolgensma does is deliver a working copy of that gene directly into the body. One infusion into a vein. The corrected gene integrates into the cells. And in many cases, particularly when given early, before symptoms start, it stops the disease almost entirely. Babies who would have spent their lives on ventilators have learned to walk. Some have run. The data on early treated patients, now several years out, shows results that scientists in this field had never seen before. So yes, the science is real. The results are real. But that still doesn't explain how you arrive at $2.1 million as the price. Here's how it works. And this is the part of the story that almost never gets explained. When pharmaceutical companies price a drug like this, they don't start with what it costs to make. They start with what it costs to not have it. The existing treatment for spinal muscular atrophy, a drug called Spinraza, requires injections into the spine. Repeat injections. Every 4 months. For life. The annual cost of Spinraza at the time Zolgensma launched was roughly $375,000 per year. Over 10 years, that's close to $4 million. Over a lifetime, it's potentially many times more. Novartis, the company that sells Zolgensma, looked at that number and made a calculation. They said, our drug is a one-time treatment. It replaces decades of ongoing therapy. So we can price it at roughly half the 10-year cost of the alternative and still call it a bargain. That is the logic behind $2.1 million. Not what the drug costs to manufacture. Not the research investment. The price is benchmarked against the cost of not having it and set just below that ceiling. There is even a name for this approach. It is called value-based pricing. And the value being priced is the value of a child's life and mobility, measured in healthcare dollars over time. Think of it like this. Imagine your roof is leaking badly. The water damage is going to cost you $50,000 over the next 10 years if you do nothing. A contractor shows up and says, I can fix it permanently right now for $20,000. That's a bargain. You save money. But what if you never had $20,000? What if you barely had $1,000? That is the situation millions of American families face. And it is where the price story gets uncomfortable. Now here is the detail that changes everything. Zolgensma was not invented by Novartis. The science behind it was developed over years at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Funded in significant part by research grants, government money, meaning taxpayer money, and by private donations from families of children with SMA, including a foundation called Sophia's Cure, started by parents of an affected child. A small biotech company called Avezize took that science, refined it, ran the clinical trials, and got it to the point of FDA approval. They were a startup. And in 2018, before the drug was even approved, Novartis acquired Avezize for $8.7 billion. The executives and venture capital investors at Avezize made tens, and in some cases hundreds, of millions of dollars each in that acquisition. The families who fundraised. The researchers who published the early science. the taxpayers whose grants funded the foundational work. They received nothing from that transaction. No conditions were placed on the acquisition. No pricing requirements. No access guarantees. 1 year later, Zolgensma was approved. Price, $2.1 million. And by 2024, Novartis had made over $6.4 billion in total revenue from a drug rooted in publicly funded science. Now, to be fair, and the data matters here, Novartis did put access programs in place. They offered to spread the $2.1 million cost over 5 years, so insurers and state Medicaid programs weren't hit with the full amount at once. They offered outcome-based agreements, meaning if the drug didn't work, payers could potentially get money back. And today, for patients with commercial insurance in the United States, coverage rates are high. The drug reaches most of the children who need it in America. But here is what the data also shows. An independent research group called ICR, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, analyzed Zolgensma's value and concluded a fair price would fall between $310,000 and $900,000, not $2.1 million. The gap between $900,000 and $2.1 million is not research cost. It is not manufacturing cost. It is not even profit margin on the science itself. That gap is what the market will bear. And Novartis knew exactly what the market would bear, because the ICR president publicly noted something remarkable at the time of launch. He said, and this is documented, that Novartis had considered pricing Zolgensma at close to $5 million. They chose $2.1 million and called it responsible. So what does this tell us about how million-dollar drugs get priced? It tells us 3 things. First, the price has almost nothing to do with what the drug costs to make. A single dose of Zolgensma is a small volume of a biological solution. The manufacturing is complex, yes, but the price is not set by the factory. It is set by a calculation of what the alternative costs and what insurers will pay. Second, when you hear a pharmaceutical company say their price is value-based, what they are saying is that they price the drug against the cost of the disease, not the cost of the drug. The value being captured is the value of your health, measured in what the system has historically spent treating the condition. Third, drugs developed on the back of public funding, taxpayer grants, and charitable donations carry no pricing obligations when they are acquired by private companies. The public pays twice, once to fund the science, and again at the pharmacy, or through rising insurance premiums that absorb the cost. Zolgensma is not an isolated case. Right now, the most expensive drug in the United States is a therapy called Lenmaldi. It treats a rare and devastating neurological disease in infants. Price, $4.25 million per patient. Behind it is Hemgenix, for hemophilia, $3.5 million. Elevidys, for muscular dystrophy, $3.2 million. Every single one of these follows the same pricing logic. Rare disease, small patient population, no alternative, and a price set not by what it costs, but by what the system will pay rather than lose the patient entirely. The technical term for a drug that targets a disease affecting fewer than 200,000 Americans is an orphan drug. And the Orphan Drug Act, passed in 1982, gives companies that develop them extended exclusivity, tax credits, and a faster path through the FDA. All incentives to develop treatments for rare conditions that would otherwise be ignored. Those are genuinely good policies. They have led to real treatments for real diseases. But they also created the architecture for pricing drugs at whatever the market will bear. Because when the patient population is tiny and the disease is devastating, there is no market pressure. There is only desperation. Here's the number to carry with you. $2.1 million. That is not what Zolgensma costs to make. It is not what the research costs to fund. It is the price of the alternative, cut roughly in half, set just below the ceiling of what the system would pay. The science is real. The results are real. The disease is devastating, and the treatment genuinely changes lives. And the pricing has almost nothing to do with any of that. That is not a conspiracy. It is not hidden. It is documented in the pricing frameworks the company published, the ICR analyses, the congressional testimony, and the financial filings. It is simply how the system is built. And that is what this channel is here to explain. Not to tell you what to think, but to show you what the data actually says and let you draw your own conclusions. If this is the kind of story you want to understand, subscribe. And if you know someone paying for a drug they don't fully understand the price of, send them this. Not because I'm telling anyone what to do, but because understanding the system is always the first step. I'll see you in the next one.